Okay, we're recording now. So, hello, Chip and Jan. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for
Hi,
having
Shannon.
us. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm really happy to do this with you, and I'm really looking forward to what you have to share. So, to everyone that's listening to this at our event, Free and Clear Mind 2.0, I just kind of want to say a few words about both of you before we start talking or getting into it. And I really just wanted to share. Well, what I know first is that both of you are in Salt Spring Island, and I met you both when I came to 3P school in June, and I was really blown away, just like we were talking about before we started this recording. I was really blown away by the experience and what you had to share. Um, and I think instead of me talking about what I know about you, I'd rather you just get into uh, how you came across this and how and what you're doing with it now. I think that's the power is more into that than me speaking about it. So if you could please take it away from here.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll just give you a little bit of background. Then I think Jan has a story to begin with. Jan and I this year, well, in June next year, I should say, we'll be married for 50 years. So,
Wow.
yeah, I know it doesn't seem possible, but anyway, uh, both of us came from what we thought was different when we were young. Now we find out that many people come from pretty dysfunctional home life, as kids. Jan went through some things. My home life was a little more dramatic in that my father was an alcoholic who at times could be violent, and I was the oldest of 11 kids, so I had this whole mindset of thinking I was responsible for looking after that when after I turned 12 or 13. And I left home very, very young. And interesting thing for me, looking back now, is I left that environment and eventually, not very long after, met Jan. And there's a correlation between what we think of as these principles and the idea of falling in love. When people fall in love, they do very little judgment of each other. They don't care exactly how they go about life. They just want to see the beauty in the other person. And that's kind of what happened for me when I met Jan. We had 2 or 3 years of really being really happy when we first got married, in spite of our backgrounds, in spite of what we went through. But slowly but surely, after a few years, my anxiety, my depression, my anger, and to some extent my hatred for what I experienced when I was a kid and my father kind of crept back into our lives and into our marriage, to a point where our marriage was failing and we were experiencing just misery all the time. And then there was a little twist of fate that happened with Jan.
So in 1975, after Sid Banks had been talking to people for maybe a year or so, I guess, but a very small group of people. But some friends of ours who lived in our neighborhood had knew about this experience that Sid had. And at the time, we were totally on a search for enlightenment or some kind of breakthrough. But so we were reading all these books and practicing different techniques and everything. And we just didn't realize that the more we searched, the more unhappy we got. And so we became less ordinary. We thought all our friends who were just, ordinary, happy people who lived around us, we were superior to them because we were on this search. But we didn't get that they were, well, a lot of people were happy being ordinary, but we were totally miserable. Again, that's hindsight, but at the time we just thought we were on the right track and everything. And so when this couple we knew, they had asked us to look after their kids while they were visiting this person on Salt Spring Island. And so when over that weekend, it turned out that I had to come over to Salt Spring because one of the kids we were looking after had an injury that needed some medical care. So the parents met me over on Salt Spring at where I took the water taxi to from our other island. And then we got the child taken care of, and then I was just going along for the ride for the rest of the day. So they were going back to visit Sid and his wife. And so I just remember this feeling that there was something mystical that I felt just heading down that driveway towards Sid's house. And I'd heard about Sid, but he didn't fit with our picture of what enlightenment would be. Like if someone had a breakthrough, it had to be someone from India, or the Himalayas or something. And so some of our friends around us started to become happier. And it turned out they'd been listening to this man named Sid. But we were totally dismissive about it because, well, it's life is more serious than that. If people start getting happy, then that can't be anything valid to us. But as I'm driving down this driveway, I just was getting this sense of something. I don't know whether it was like deja vu or but I was getting this feeling there was something drawing me. And so when I got to the house with our friends, and they introduced me to Barb, Sid's wife at the time, his first wife, and she was just so lovely and so warm, and she invited me in, and then I went into the living room, and there was a man sitting on the sofa, and he just looked over, and before he was introduced to me, I just knew that had to be Sid, because I hadn't even seen a picture of him, but there was something about him. There was just this amazing calmness and love coming from him. And that really just settled me down even more, because at the time I was a very, very insecure, shy person. And added to the fact that I was totally anxious about my life, because at that time, Chip and I had gotten through over the honeymoon part of our marriage, and now we're just like, added to this serious search and thinking that we're ahead of everybody. We're just totally miserable with each other, and somehow I had gotten to the feeling that I can't be happy if Chip is miserable. And Chip had just gotten back into thinking about his past and his family experiences, which were really, really traumatic. And so at that point in my life, I was just a mess, really insecure, and just felt like I wasn't a really good friend to my friends. I wasn't a good mother. I wasn't a good wife. So I come into this room, and I look into this man's eyes, and I just see total love and calmness. And that was like started to work on me. And so anyway, I was invited in and everyone was seated in a sofa or a chair, and so I just went and sat on a cushion on the floor, and just was trying to be inconspicuous because I was very shy. And so there were maybe like 3 or 4 couples visiting the Banks at the time, and so they were just after I was introduced to people. Sid was just chatting with everyone, but then all of a sudden, it got quiet, and then Sid started to talk from a different place, and it wasn't just socializing. There was something, he was talking from such a depth that anyone who's heard Sid talk on his recordings, it's just the same, just that talking these truths about life. And as I was sitting there, everything he said, he just calmly say one truth after another. And I just kept thinking, that's true. That's true. I couldn't argue with anything he was saying. And it occurred to me that what he was saying, everything was like what this essence of all the wise things I'd ever valued over my life. Like the what I considered the truth, like in my childhood faith, or in when I studied Native American cultures in college. I was drawn to the way they talked about the Great Spirit, and in literature, just that thread of truth that runs through the wisdom of the ages. That's what I was hearing, and it just settled me down, and all my thoughts that were usually so present in my head, like all these thoughts about what's going to happen to my marriage, how can I be a better mother and not be upset all the time, all these thoughts just disappeared for a while. I mean, I was just so drawn into the beauty of these words. And Sid looked over and at me, and he said, if everyone in this room and everyone in the world could see how beautiful they really are on the inside, and if they could see who they really are, they'd have everything they've ever dreamed of. They'd have all the happiness they could ever imagine. And in that second, I just felt, I knew that what he was saying was true. It just sunk in, and I felt it. And I just had this sense of peace and this beautiful feeling. And it was as if I was living in a metaphor, because I felt like my life was just this beautiful pathway spread in front of me. And it was all going to be beautiful, including my marriage. Like, I just knew that in that moment. And as I'm sitting there and just settling into this amazing feeling, another amazing thing occurred to me, that it looks to me as if what all the wise people were always saying, and the part that I always liked about what the wisdom of the ages was saying, was that you have to look inside yourself for the truth. It's not out there. And that had always struck me as really powerful. But in that moment, when Sid was talking, I felt like I really heard what the wise people had been trying to tell us, because as I was listening to Sid, it struck me so hard that if that's true, that it's coming from inside us, then that wisdom isn't coming from the man who's talking right now. It has to be coming from me. How could I be recognizing it if it wasn't already inside me? And if it's already been inside me all my life, it's going to be there for the rest of my life. And that was an amazing experience for me. I'll never forget that. It's like I realized, instead of just intellectualizing, what the wise people were trying to tell us. So then I just sat there, just really soaking in everything Sid was saying. And then all of a sudden, he just switched gears. And he was saying that if you ever find yourself in an argument with someone, you'll find it really helpful to be able to see that it's just your thought that wants you to keep the argument going, and you want to win the argument. He said, if you can let go of that and just stop arguing, and just whatever you have to do to remove yourself from the argument, he said, you'll find that really helpful in life. And right away, what I thought about was our arguments, and that didn't make sense to me, because I thought, well, of course I'm going to want to defend myself, because I'm the one who's right all the time. I was just feeling that why would I want to give in to Chip's side? And then that was like went through my mind really quickly. But then I just got back into the feeling of that I've been having, of that calmness. And I looked at Sid, and I thought, he's definitely sharing some amazing truths. And why would I doubt that? Like, I've heard something beautiful, so I'm just going to be open to that, even though my intellect couldn't agree with it. And so then things wrapped up, and people were saying goodbye, and I remember just leaving the kitchen. You know, their door out to their driveway was in the kitchen, and I remember looking over at Sid, and again I just caught his eyes, and I just thought, this is the last I've seen of him. And but then, and on the way home, I know we had to take the ferry home, and I don't remember that ride at all, but I distinctly remember walking up our driveway to our back door, where Chip was on the other side with our son, who was about 3 years old at the time. And I just had this feeling, when I get to the other side of the door and I tell Chip what just happened, he's going to be so thrilled. I could not wait to tell Chip.
And so was Chip thrilled? Jen comes in and, like, first of all, I was in a miserable mood because I'm left taking care of my son, blah, 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 you know. And I don't know any of this is going on. I don't know that she's met Sid or anything like that. And Jan came in and she was like beaming, and she starts going on about how we really don't have any problems. You know, it's just the way we're looking at it. It's the way we're thinking. And I'm like, give me a break. Are you kidding me? You know? And she tried to tell me a little bit more about talking to Sid, and it made me really angry. I just started arguing and telling her, I don't want to hear this. It's just stupid, you know? Like, for me, life was very serious. We spent hours and hours and hours on our knees in the Zendo, and, you know, it took a lifetime to find any real knowledge, and you had to have a master, and so on and so forth. And this was just silly that you go off to Salt Spring for an afternoon and you come back and all your problems are gone. It's like, I don't want to hear about this, right? And I got angry, and Jan just, I could see her, I think she wasn't expecting that, because, you know, we were searching together in earnest when we first started. We knew there had to be something, you know. And so I know she expected I was going to go, oh, great, you know. But I couldn't handle it. I just really didn't like it. And so we kind of went our separate ways in the house, and went to bed that night. And in the morning, I got up and there was singing coming from the kitchen. I'm thinking, there's no singing in my house. You know, what? Well, I thought, oh, she's still into that stupid stuff she was talking about yesterday, you know. And so I go down and I picked a fight. I just brought up something that I knew would upset Jan. I mean, I wasn't conscious if that's what I was doing at the time, but I know now what I was doing. I needed her back where I knew where the handles were in our relationship and everything. And so I picked the fight, and Jan got upset, but only for a few minutes. And then I saw for the first time something I was going to see quite a few times in the next few weeks, is she just settled back in and just wasn't going to participate. And this really, really upset me, you know. And so, you know, I would bring up an even more difficult subject again and try and get her. And every once in a while I could get her upset for a minute or two and feel very kind of satisfied. But then I would see that moment when that's just not, I could just see she just wasn't living there anymore and wasn't going to participate. And I really thought this would pass, that this would, you know, we'd be back to normal in a little while. But after a while, I got to the point where I brought out the worst thing I could ever talk about and just threw it at Jan. I saw her get upset, and I saw her tear up. And then I just saw it again, that she just pulled back. And then I thought, well, that's it. Our marriage is over. You know, I mean, I can't live with this. My wife happy all the time and everything. You know, it's just ridiculous. Yeah. And so what happened for me, everybody has their kind of moment of truth, I guess. We were invited to a party, and there were a lot of good musicians there, and we wanted to play music. And it was the first time we went out together in months and months and months to anything, you know. And so we were at this party, and I was playing some music with some people, and Jan, and the couple that we'd been babysitting for, that brought her over to Sid's, walked in the front door. Now, first of all, this was unusual because they were really insecure people as I knew them. I couldn't imagine even coming to a party like this. And something really weird happened. When they walked in, I felt this jolt of fear, just, you know, and I couldn't understand it because I had always felt superior to them, right? They were the only people I think I knew who were more insecure than us and still together. And so I tried to ignore it, and finally they were sitting with a group of people where I could see them. I thought I'm just going to walk out to the kitchen and get something to eat. So I was in the kitchen, and the gentleman walked out and started talking, just nothing about the principles and just being friendly. And I couldn't stand to be in his presence. It just really bothered me. So I made some excuse and turned around, and I ran into the woman on the way back into the living room. And I felt that again. And I thought, geez, you know. And so I can't explain it, but I left the party. I couldn't stand to be there with them. I left Jan at the party. I went home. And Jan came back about half an hour, 45 minutes later, and said, how come you left the party? I said, well, it was a terrible party. It was boring, you know. She said, no, it wasn't. It was great. And then she said, did you see so-and-so and so-and-so? And I said, oh, don't start with that. And she said, don't you see how good they look? I said, yeah, they got some new clothes, big deal, you know. And I said, no, it's more than that. You know, and I said, you're going to start, but I said, so they got religion. Just leave me alone. I don't want to talk about it, right? So Jan said, okay, and she went off to bed. I couldn't sleep that night. I never went to sleep the whole night. I was up all night, and I couldn't figure out why I was so disturbed, right? And so in the morning when Jan came down, she said, didn't you go to bed last night? And I said, well, I wasn't tired, something stupid like that. You know? She said, you didn't sleep at all? I said, no. And I was sitting there drinking coffee, and it was this experience of something coming out of my mouth that I wasn't expecting. It. It's like I said to Jan, I want to go see so-and-so and so-and-so. And I almost looked to see who said it, you know, because I had no idea why I said that. And Jan was pleased, like, oh, okay, you know, you want to go and find out about this. But in my head, I thought, I'm going to go tell these people the butt out of our marriage and how stupid all of this is, and they don't know anything about consciousness raising. And I was going to give them a piece of my mind, but I didn't tell Jan this. So they were very nice. They had us come over. It was like Sunday morning. We drove over to their house, and we went in. They had coffee on and some pastries. And Jan walked. It was an open floor plan, and Jan walked in and sat down on the couch and started talking to this gentleman. I turned around, and the woman had 2 cups of coffee, and she was setting them down on the table. And my first thought was, I don't want to sit here and talk to this woman. I was really in a bad mood, you know. And so we sat down, and I looked at her, and she says, so what's on your mind, Chip? It was a fatal mistake. Because I just lit into her. I just started talking about, this is a bunch of really simplistic, stupid stuff. You just can't change just from hearing somebody speak for a few minutes. And then I started saying to her, and you need to butt out of my marriage. My relationship with my wife is none of your business. And I was getting angry, you know. And she just looked at me, and she said, and she was a very quiet person. You know, she was not somebody who spoke up a lot, but she just looked at me and she said, Chip, I have never had a single solitary conversation with Jan about your marriage or your relationship. The way she said it, I knew she was telling me the truth. So it's like it just took the wind out of my sails, and you know. And then out of nowhere, she looked at me and she said, Chip, the only thing that stands between you and Jan and all the love and happiness in this world is thought. And I can remember thinking, if that's not the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But I happened to be looking over her shoulder at Jan when she said it, and this feeling just rushed in, and I started to get emotional. And I really did not want to tear up or be emotional in front of this woman, but I couldn't stop it. And I couldn't understand what was happening. And the next part, I'm just saying, this is how I describe it. It was as if I was looking around in my head at all of our fights and arguments, and they looked like these little piles in my head. And I remember thinking, well, of course they're just thought. What else could they be? And that feeling just rushed in again, and I got emotional, but I couldn't stand it. I stood up, and I was very rude. I said, this is a bunch of bleep bleep. And I walked out and got in the truck. And Jan apologized for my behavior and came out and scolded me a little bit for being so rude. And I couldn't talk. So we're driving home, and of course, this is the early 70s. And I just kept thinking, you're busted, you know, you're caught. And it was like, it wasn't because of what the woman said. It wasn't because of what Jan told me about Sid. I knew I'd seen something in my head. I knew that I'd seen something about thought. And part of me just really knew that that was true, but I wasn't ready to look at it. And so I hung out in this very insecure, upset state for another couple of weeks. And one day, we were up early in the morning with our son, and I was sitting on the couch. And Jan was on the floor with her boy, and it was early morning light was coming in at a sharp angle through the window. And it was shining in their hair, and I was looking at them. And that feeling just rushed in again, just filled me. And I just had this simple thought, you know, like, I just thought, all I have to do is surrender. There's nothing to do. And that feeling just took over. And everything, I mean, everything in our lives changed after that. And years later, I mean, even just a few years ago, I had an insight about that particular moment. And the insight was, for whatever reason, that was the first time in my life when I really saw. That was an experience of seeing. And I saw the true reality when I looked at them, and I felt the feeling from that true reality. I didn't understand that at the time, but I know that was the first time that I ever really saw something. And I had to go beyond my intellect because I could not understand. I had no frame of reference for what was happening, but I knew it was real. And so that's essentially how we got started.
Wow.
And then shortly after that, I was, or just before Chip had that insight, I remember I had been listening to Sid, not for very long, and I had met Sid, and then I think he had given me some writings, just some copies of some things to take home, and or somebody passed them on to me, and so I would read that, and but I was getting like a more and more beautiful feeling every day. And one day I remember I looked over Chip, at Chip, I was fixing supper, and I looked over at Chip, and something hit me just so hard that I'd been waiting for Chip to change, because I was looking at him and he was still trying to figure it out. He was, you know, in the old Chip, and serious and anxious, and as I was looking at him, I saw that just as soon as I saw that I'd been waiting for him to change, I realized, well, that's the heart of what I've been learning, is that people are already absolutely perfect on the inside. And so in that moment, I just saw Chip, like he talked about seeing that day. I saw the beauty of Chip, like when I first met him, and that, you know, the joy and everything. And it's just like this it just passed over the way I was looking at him. And then I saw, you know, his same anxious face and everything, but it didn't matter, because I'd realized that he's just beautiful just the way he is. He doesn't need to get this or anything. He's just perfect just the way he is. And that changed so much for me and for Chip, because, and to this day, I know that was a huge part of what helped our marriage.
I actually felt that. We didn't talk about it, but I felt I just felt that pressure just taken away. You know, I don't know how to describe it, but I knew something had happened. I felt that there was just something that wasn't there anymore, you know, in terms of that desire for me to change. And I think that was part of me finally getting curious and finally starting to listen, is that tension was taken out in terms of us changing. But it's so amazing when I look back on it, because all of this happened without going to hear Sid speak or anything, really, for me. I met him once at these people's house and shook his hand. But the same essential thing happens in every community and every couple, is that when one person changes, including when Sid Banks first changed, when one person changes, it creates confusion for those around them, because they're used to the habit of how they interact with them. and they're used to that person responding in a certain way, so it creates confusion. That confusion is really healthy because it confuses your thinking. It takes you out of it to where you have to look at something new. And when what you're looking at is sustained, like when Sid first had his experience, everybody he knew thought he'd lost his mind. But when they saw how his happiness and his solidness was sustained, that confusion turned to curiosity. And that's the same thing that happened for me with Jan. Is after a while, that confusion subsided, and I started to get curious because I could see that something real had occurred. And that same process has happened everywhere we work, in businesses, in the prisons. When we worked in this prison in Florida, we were working with inmates. I mean, Sid's tapes and materials were a big part of the small, helping the small group that first came to our first class. But the thing that helped everybody in the entire prison was the first 2 or 3 women that really changed. Nobody had ever seen that before in that environment. That was like, they just could not get a handle on it, including the corrections officers, the chaplain, the warden, and all the other inmates. Those 3 or 4 women who really had that deep change from the very first class and the very, very first experience of listening to the materials and us talking about it. That created enormous level of confusion in that prison, right? But that confusion changed after they saw that it was sustained and this was real and these people had found help. And what that did, it brought hope into their thinking, into everybody in that place. And that hope created the curiosity. And next thing you know, our voluntary class had a huge wait list, but it was those first 3 people. So that process is repeated everywhere this is introduced. Somebody shares something, somebody gets a really deep insight, their change confuses people around them, but creates that feeling of hope that something's possible. That something's possible. Somebody was asking me yesterday where they could go to get certified to teach the principles. And I said, well, I guess there's things out there, but the only real authority you have is to talk about your own experience, to talk about what you experienced in terms of change and feelings. That's what people feel is real and really true. I'm not saying it's not valuable to talk about what the principles are as best you can and explain them, but if you, Sid used to say, talk story. Don't try and explain it. Talk story. Tell your story. Because in the story is the truth and the feeling. And it's amazing. It really is. But I thought if I could, I'd like to share a follow-on experience that came shortly after all of that with us.
Please,
and I'll keep it brief if I can. It was so interesting in the beginning, like out of nowhere, within a matter of a few weeks, we were happy as a couple again. We were enjoying our lives, we're enjoying our son, and I really intellectually could not understand why. Like I couldn't think of what I'd stopped doing or started doing or whatever that was different. It just happened, right? And that's a really hard thing to explain sometimes. So a couple of months in, we were really experiencing a different life. We were seeing the world from a different place, from a different level of understanding. And so one night we'd gone to bed and Jan was asleep, and for some reason, who knows why, I started thinking about some cruel and mean-spirited things I'd said to Jan before this change. And of course, when I thought of that, I just cringed. That, oh God, how could I have said that kind of thing, And I was just, and I had this little insight. It was just like this. I just thought, yeah, that was a different world. That occurred in a completely different world. And the world that you're being shown now, that's not possible. And when I thought that, and you reminded me of this when we started out today, when I thought that, I just started to feel this peace I just really started to feel this. It just kind of washed over me, and I realized, yeah, it doesn't really matter what I've done or said in the past. Now it's gone. This is another life. This is another world. And I went to sleep, and I slept for like 12 or 13 hours, which was really unusual for me because I'm a 6 or 7 hour person, And when I woke up, I couldn't get my finger on it. I just felt immensely lighter. I just felt like I knew something had shifted. Right? 2 weeks later, I'm in bed, Jan's asleep, and the same thing happens. I start thinking about my last encounter with my father when I was about 17. And it was angry and violent on both of our parts. And as I thought about it, I literally could feel the bile rising in my throat. I just felt sick as I thought about it. And, I felt the anger, I felt the hatred, I felt all of that. And then it just broke. And I had this insight, and it was my father was living in a world that had been handed to him. And he had no idea there was any world outside of that. He lived within the boundaries of that world, and he was lost within that world. And I just happened to be born in his house. And it moved me so much. I can't explain how I just felt like just so much just fell away. And as I laid there, I had the strangest experience. I felt this really deep love for my dad, for my father. And I realized he was psychologically innocent. And I realized what a freedom that was for me to see that, to let go of that. And once again, I fell asleep and had this really long sleep. But in the morning, this time, I really knew how things had shifted. I knew how many volumes and volumes and volumes of thought and feelings were attached to that relationship and my idea of what it was. And I knew that had fallen away. And it shifted my personality forever. It just changed. There's parts of my personality that never come back from that one night. Just so much fell away. So much fell away. And so that's what we have with this is we have the opportunity to see a new world in any given moment and to be free from whatever the past is, whatever we've been through. And to me, there's nothing like that. And we look at how this is going out in the world through the internet and all these different countries, and that's really beautiful. I know Sid would be thrilled to see what's happening these days all over the world. But there's another way that's going out that's equally important, and that's going forward through generations with families. Like our families, I'll speak to mine. I'm sure you could look back 3 or 4 generations and see all of this pain and suffering and dysfunction and alcohol, all of that. And it stops with us. And our kids never had to experience that, and our grandchildren will never experience that. So if you take all the people that we know around the world that have had that experience and have had that shift, and you think of how that moves forward through generations, the same way dysfunction moves forward through generations. That just, it gets me. It's just amazing to think of it that way. That's how the world actually changes.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, what occurred to me when you were speaking about that is, and I'm not sure if I shared this with you in June when I seen you. Everything's still hazy from there, but my background, I lived 10 years of my life in a gang-related world with violence and crime and drugs and guns and all. I just got caught up in it so fast, and before I knew it, I was so deeply involved in it. And I'm very lucky and grateful to be out of that and be sitting here talking to you. A lot of my friends cannot say the same.
Yeah.
But you said something just a minute ago that really helped. You know, you talked about that's a different world, and it doesn't exist anymore. Like it doesn't have to be relived in any way. Or, and you didn't say this, but what occurred to me is like it doesn't have to be healed either.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's another world now, and you know, it helped me see that um, like I don't have to play there anymore. I don't have to do anything there.
That's
I
beautiful.
can,
That's
yeah.
wonderful. Mm-hmm.
It just shows. It gives me this glimpse of this possibility that there you can go ahead and create now. You don't have to do
Mm-hmm.
anything there. You don't have to heal anything there. Those are the words kind of coming out.
Or resolve anything there.
Resolve. That's a good description of it. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, the question I would have for you is like what was going through my mind was how does this change occur as best as you can describe it? Because I can't, but I know that I've experienced this, you know, like you said earlier, when people talk and then they get into a quiet space and change occurs and it's sustained, like those three women in the Florida prison that you were talking about. And it's sustainable. It's not effective, shiny silver spoon change that will fade soon. You know, it's just like everything changes.
Yeah.
And so maybe for the people that are wondering the same thing I am as well, that are listening to this, is how does that happen? Because there is no system, there is no process really.
I think the simplest way to describe it is we live in the relativity of our thinking. We're always trying to figure it out, and we defend ourselves within the context of that thinking, or what we think the world is, and who we should be with, and what we should be doing. We live in that world of relativity, in which there really are no answers. You know, like if there were, none of us would have any problems. Right? What's different here is when we do get quiet, and there's an interesting aspect to the whole thing about listening. If you really listen deeply, there's something I know about that, and that is you cannot listen deeply and think at the same time. It's not possible. You're either listening to your thinking or you're listening. You know? And so what happens when we listen to one of Sid's recordings, or we come together at the school or whatever, and things get really quiet, we're actually suspending the world that we create moment to moment to moment with our thinking. We have a moment of suspending that. And from there, we all have this wisdom within. We all really know everything we need to know at some level inside. When we get quiet enough, you could put it this way, your level of consciousness rises out of your thinking to your true self. And that true self can look back at the world and see it with understanding, and see it with compassion, and see it for what it really is. That it is just a great ball of thought, a great ball of misunderstanding in many cases. You know, so I think the change is permanent because you've actually seen the world from a different place, and you act out of what you see from that pure, less contaminated place. Like when I looked at my son and my wife on the floor and I had that experience, I was looking at them for a split second, I was looking at them without the filter of my thinking, without my insecurity, without my anger, without my mistrust of the world. For a split second, the world stopped. The world that I was creating moment to moment in my life, with my thinking. And I got to see what was really in front of me. You know? And that's why it's sustained, and that's why it's fast. And you're not resolving all the stuff that's going on in this world that we're experiencing. You're actually stepping out of that and feeling that health and looking back at that. Like when I described seeing my father's innocence, now that was new thought. That's something had never occurred to me in my life. And it could only occur because for a split second, I slipped into that quiet And all the history and all the stuff I went through just for a split second disappeared. And as it disappeared, I got to see what really was, what really was going on. It's like you can't see the game of life from within the game of life. You have to step out and get quiet and look back at it. And you will see it with understanding when that happens. When you described your experience at the school, that's what was happening. And so you can't say, I did this, or I changed my mind about that, or I realized I don't have. It's not that. You're looking at it from a different place. And your wisdom is guiding you at that point. And there's nobody on this planet that doesn't have that profound wisdom within them. They just have to find a way to get quiet enough to have that split second when all this just stops and you get to see. So that's why it's permanent.
And it really is coming from your true self. I know that I was trying to change my outside world, especially at that point in our life where we were on that search, the so-called spiritual search. I had become, according to the wisdom of the conventional wisdom of the day, upset with the establishment, and this is the late 60s when we met, in the early 70s, and so I had all these negative thoughts about society and everything, and so I wanted all these changes, and I wasn't seeing that where it was starting from. Like the outside world looked bad to me because I wasn't happy with myself, and so that judgmental feeling about myself was being projected onto the outside world. And so when I heard Sid, I was introduced to the inside world where there's no need for change. It's already it's perfect, and it showed me that when I got that beautiful feeling, then changes happen in my life. And that's mysterious. Like that's you can't explain that, but I know it's true because it's still happening to this day, that the more I just remember that beautiful feeling is what life is meant to be, and what I'm meant to share, then I feel that gratitude for life, and then my life gets nicer. But when I try and fix it, or I'm judgmental about some things in my life I don't like and some I like, then I'm caught up in that personal self, and then the changes they're not positive. Things may change, but they could get worse. But every time I give into that beautiful feeling, and I'm grateful, even for the fact that I've learned so much about how I operate. Like I had a client the other day that said he was really struggling with how he was just having so many negative thoughts and getting discouraged and etc. And it was a very wise person who I knew a lot, but he like all of us, sometimes you slip back. But he said something that really caught me, and he said, well, if it weren't for these phantom thoughts, and I just started to laugh, and I said, did you hear what you said? Like, they're phantoms. I said, that's what makes all the difference. We're so lucky that we know that, even if we don't use it all the time. We don't use that wisdom to kind of see it with more neutrality. We get caught up in wishing that, I wish I didn't go down and have those negative thoughts. But the fact is, it doesn't matter, because we know the game. We know what we're doing. And it was really, because he started to laugh, and I was chuckling because I'm in the same boat. I get seduced by the personal thoughts and judgments every day. I go in and out of that, but less and less. And because now I'm just accepting it's just part of life. It's not every minute is nirvana, or but if you can accept that it's not going to be perfect every moment, but you're okay with that, then it gets nicer, and your life really does become nicer and nicer.
Yeah.
So that whole idea that being grateful just for the gift of knowing what we're doing, knowing how we fall into those traps. Yeah, that's the gift. And then the outside gifts of having nicer relationships and more, healthy relationships, more physical health, more whatever the outside changes that keep coming to us, by the way. That's even secondary to that gift of understanding. Because then you know that even if those outside things fell apart and you had a serious illness or you lost your house or whatever, with that understanding, you could still be happy.
Yeah.
So the understanding is the gift.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. It's like life is contact sport. We're all going to go through things that are not great, but it's knowing how to get back to home base on a continual basis. Like I remember talking to Sid about like, am I ever going to ride and just be happy all the time? And he said, probably not. That was kind of disappointing. He said, no. He said, listen to me. It's not about being in a high space and a beautiful feeling all the time. It's about learning to go in and out of separate realities with grace. Because when you do that, when you go in and out of separate realities with grace, you learn. When you go in and out of separate realities and you're disappointed in yourself and you wish you could be better, you really don't learn. You're back in the same thing you were into before you even came across the principles. So you have to be kind to yourself. You have to accept, in a loving way, you have to accept your humanity. But when you do that, it becomes fun because you watch the game like I have a good laugh. We have a good laugh sometimes when we have a day when we're out of it. I mean, not while we're there, but after.
Yeah.
We have a good laugh because we see the comedy of it. We see how we really have been given everything we need, but we have these days when we're both vulnerable when we get tired, when we do too much, we travel too much or whatever. And those thoughts come back in, that insecurity just comes for a visit. But it's not the same as when we had that insecurity before we had understanding. Before we had understanding, we thought that was the real world. Now it's just something we know is visiting, it's going to pass, and it doesn't mean anything. And that sounds like a small thing, but that's an amazing, amazing blessing to have that sense that even when you're down and you're feeling rough again or whatever, it will pass. And there is home base, and you will find your true self again. And it gets proven to you enough times that you just know that that's the way it is. To me, that's an amazing gift. I can't think of a more powerful gift than that. And so, yeah, maybe in this lifetime we'll want to arrive at a time when it's perfect all the time. But the other thing that Sid said in that conversation, he said, just think of it this way. There's no end to learning. It's always going to get a little better. A little better, a little better, a little better. You'll have your days that are not that great, but you're always moving in that direction once you discover what you have on the inside. It's like you've gotten on the train's going where you need to go. Now you can get upset or worried while you're on the train, but you're still on the train. And that's a wonderful thing to know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, I can relate to that myself. I, have experiences of insecurity or stress or anxiety. And before a little bit of a glimpse of this understanding, I would automatically jump and try and do something about it, try and get rid of it, or try and fix it, or try and or sometimes even worse, act from that place of stress and make really stupid decisions, And now it's, like you said, when you have this knowing, although I experience it and it's really uncomfortable and I don't want to be in it, there is this sense of like, okay, it is part of thought, it is not part of reality, and it's transient, and all I have to do is wait it out for that. And
Nice to yourself, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's like when you said, You can go from separate reality to separate reality with grace. That seals it right there. And I think you're right. It seems like a small thing, but it's not, because it completely changes how you act in the physical world if you're not willing to react to the insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I know. I remember feeling just such a relief after that conversation. It took so much pressure off myself to try and improve. Even though our lives had changed so much, I was still in that mode of self-improvement. You know, it's got to get better. It's got to get better. Well, what's got to get better? You know, the way that I'm thinking. No, what's got to get better is to leave it alone and just let it be, and just see what you've been given. Like, we slip in and out of gratitude because of that. And gratitude is so powerful in terms of keeping happiness and feeling settled. So it's fascinating to me that way. Now, I just want to say, because I've said some things about my dad. My dad got this. You know, he'd been lost in just a mess his whole life. But he lived the last 7 years of his life in happiness and solidness. And he forgave himself. Actually, didn't forgive himself. He just knew that, you know, he was in a new world. And I just want to put that out there because I don't want to leave that impression on, not with us anymore. But he really did live the last 7 years of his life as a happy person without even being bothered by alcohol or anything. He didn't even think about it, which confused everybody around him, by the way. The rest of my family, his friends.
That's so beautiful. Did you talk to him about the principles, or he just...
How much time do we have?
Not very much, actually. Well, maybe 3-4 more minutes.
He knew what we were doing in our work.
Yeah.
And he saw the change in how we were with him, and how you were, especially with him.
We got back in touch with him. I hadn't talked to him in 12 or 13 years at one point, you know, before we learned this. And we got back in touch with him, and it wasn't very good to begin with. You know, we'd call him and be kind of out of it. But he was also very confused by why we would be calling, and we just kept talking to him. And then he got really, really sick, and thought he was going to die. And for another time, I'll tell you a story. But basically, I went to see him. And I didn't talk about the principles, but I did. I did tell him about my insight about him living in that world. And I did tell him that in a certain way, I told him that he really was innocent. He was just lost. And he heard it. He really, really heard it. And he was supposed to die in that particular session. I was talking to him on his supposed deathbed. But he recovered and never took another drink, just became a totally different person. And I didn't say there's these 3 principles, nothing like that. It was a conversation about psychological innocence, really. And that if he'd have known better, I said to him, if you'd have known better, you would have done better, but you lived in that world. And somehow he heard that. Somehow it sunk in, you know. And he was a lot of fun in his last 7 years. He kept beer in the fridge for his pals when they'd come over and give them a beer and everything, but he never drank. He called our kids like every other week or so and talked to them about school. He never talked to me about school my whole life. But it was an amazing thing to see. And this summer, Jan and I went to a family reunion back in Ontario. And first time that all of my brothers and sisters, all 11 of us, have been in the same room since we were kids, really. You know, we'd see 3 or 4 here, 4 or 5 there. But the interesting thing was, I had this stuff in my head going back. You know, I don't want to hear them talking about the old man and what we went through. I just wasn't looking forward to things we'd heard in previous visits. We got there and we went to this park where everybody met, and I just couldn't get it together. Everybody was really enjoying each other. Nobody was drinking. And I just came away thinking, well, how the hell did that happen? You know, But when I think about it, my father's change, our change, without saying anything to them, they've been watching, you know. And if you watch, you eventually see that there's a possibility. And when you see there's a possibility, hope comes back in. And when hope comes back in, it changes the direction of your thinking. So we left Ontario thinking, man, what was that? It's great. It's really great.
That's wonderful. And the reason I asked that question is because I've noticed people in my life, family-wise, that I don't talk to about this at all, but I've seen the change in them. They're calmer, they're more peaceful. We haven't even had even one sentence of conversation towards this direction. And I found that extremely mind-boggling, you know? I really couldn't understand it at first and going, well, they must have talked to somebody, but they didn't.
Yeah, that's very wise to just love them. Just love your family. If they're interested, they'll ask. If they want to know anything, they'll ask, but just to love them as they are. And that's the most powerful thing in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, the model of health is worth 1,000,000 times more than the words about health.
Well said.
You live it, you know, and people change around you because you live it. Not everybody, but you get some really good surprises. You know?
That's wonderful. Well, we are at time now, so I really just want to take the time to thank you both for doing this with me and being so kind and generous to share everything that you just did. It was extremely insightful for me, and I'm sure it's going to be for anyone that listens to this. Again, thank you, and I'm really looking forward to our next chat, and hopefully that's sooner than later.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for setting this up.
Thank
This
you.
has really been nice. A nice way to start our day today. Thank you very much. And good luck to everybody that listens and comes to your program. They're very lucky to have you as a guide.
Yes.
They really are really lucky. And so I love to hear what's happening over there. That's wonderful.
Great. Yes, I'll keep you posted. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording here.